It's not the cards that are dealt, but rather how you play the game. Randy from the last lecture. What's always fascinated me about poker is not the skill of the players, because I wouldn't tell if they're good anyways, I'm not that great at it, or the way that they play the game, but the psychological aspects of poker. Poker has so many different facets, from the cards that you have in your hand to the way that you look at different players. Which is exactly why in this week's episode of Master Talk, I'm going to be breaking down the 3 lessons I learned from my very limited experience in poker that apply to presentations. Hi everyone, Brendan here for Master Talk, on your go-to channel to mastering your talk. And today, we're talking poker, so let's get shuffling. Number 1, understand the cards you're given better than anyone else. The goal of poker is not to hope for the right hand, but rather work with the one you already have. And this analogy plays in well with public speaking and life. You can't really control whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. In the same way you can't control who your parents are, where you grow up, and where you ultimately go in life in some ways. And that's why I always encourage people, especially when they start their public speaking journey, to understand the hand that they have instead of focusing on everyone else who's on the board. So for me, when I started doing public speaking, I realized that I had a lot of energy, clearly. I take a lot of risk when I present, but at the same time, I'm very loud. I don't listen as often as I should. I don't spend enough time understanding who my audience is, at least at the beginning of my journey. So I needed to start learning how to fill in the gaps. This is also true with poker players. If you're given a bad hand, you still need to play it off as if it's a good one, or you need to manage your risk accordingly to make sure that you win the game at the end, whether you have a good hand or a bad one. So it's all about understanding what you have and working with it. And that's why I encourage you to figure out who you are. Are you an introvert? Great, work with that. See what you learn from the extrovert. Can you be a bit more louder? Can you play a little bit more karaoke? And if you're on the other side of the spectrum, see how you can fill in those weaknesses. Maybe I should listen a bit more. Maybe I should practice those skills. So remember, the goal is not to be like everyone else. The goal is to figure out who you are and ultimately win the game. Number 2, pay close attention to how everyone else is playing their cards. So what's interesting about poker is there's 2 facets to the game. One side is figuring out how you should play your own cards and understanding what your hand is and what your options are. But the other part that's a lot more fascinating is seeing how everyone else on the table is playing. Some people like to risk a lot. Other people play much more conservatively. Some people get very emotional about the game, especially when they're on a losing streak. Others don't get phased at all and use that as a leverage to trick everyone else on the table. And your job is to understand the psychology of every type of player. Same analogy applies to public speaking. Some speakers are very introverted, others are extroverted, a bit too loud, and your job is to study all of them and how they speak so that you can figure out which model makes the most sense to you. There's a very big difference between introverted speakers like Brené Brown, Susan Cain, and Seth Godin versus extroverted speakers like Tony Robbins, Gary Vaynerchuk, and somebody else who's really loud. So that's what I encourage you to do. Much like when I started my public speaking journey, half of the game is playing it, the other half is studying it. So spend hours watching other people's speeches and seeing what you can learn from them. In the same way as you're watching me right now in this video, you might be saying, I like the way that he's doing this with his hands, but he's also a bit too loud. Let me not take that part of Brendan. Take a little bit from everybody and eventually you'll have the perfect hand and also the perfect game. And finally, number 3, take the necessary risks to make sure you actually stand a chance at winning. Look, nobody wins poker by playing safe all the time, unless they get really lucky with their hands. But that won't lead to consistency in the game. that is not what separates the best players from everyone else. And I argue that that's true with anything, especially public speaking. The people who are at the top of this game are not afraid to develop their own public speaking style. Understanding the cards you have is great. Understanding how all of the other players use their hands is also great. But if you don't use that knowledge to develop your own style and take the risks that you need to figure out how you're going to speak and how you're going to find your voice, you never will. That's why I encourage you, even if it means you lose a couple of games at the beginning, whether it's poker or public speaking, try those risks out. Say that extra joke you never would have said otherwise. Be a bit more sarcastic, even if you're uncomfortable with it. Say a quote just because you want to, and eventually as you test and try different methods and techniques, you'll find the ones that work for you. In the same way, I'm some dude who likes wearing a suit, but also being very loud and moving my hands all the time. That's the style I prefer on video, which is very different from the one I have on stage. So for you, as you test and try and taste different dishes, different ways of playing the game, you'll eventually find the one that works for you. So take the risk if you want any chance at winning the game in a big way. Remember, as Randy taught us, it's not the cards that are dealt, but rather how you play the game. Don't focus on everyone else's hand. Understand the cards that you have so that you can play the best game and maximize not just your chances of winning the next time you play poker, I don't really encourage that, by the way, but also winning the game of sharing your ideas with the world. As always, if you enjoyed this week's episode of Master Talk, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well to see more videos like this. And if you know someone who likes poker, be sure to send them this video so that they'll be one step closer to mastering their talk and also one step less likely to gamble. See you next time, everyone.